Hi, everybody. Welcome to Insights from Case Text. I'm Mike Whalen here in the WeWork Kansas City studio, talking to my friends in this series about writing. Today, I'm here with my buddy, Marshall Lichty of Lawyerist. Marshall, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Mike?
Good. So typically when we start these things, I like to let people rant a little bit so that the people watching on the YouTube machine can know, is this worth hanging around? So why don't you just rant for a couple minutes? Tell me what's on your mind.
Yeah, you bet. I'll start with, my rant being, don't write like a lawyer. You're all writing like lawyers, and people hate the way that lawyers write. Even other lawyers hate the way that lawyers write. So don't do that. Particularly because most often your audience is not a lawyer. Or if it is a lawyer, it's somebody who is not looking for how brilliantly you articulate your point or the words that you use to articulate your point, but it's clarity and how quickly and easily they can get through it. So stop. That's my rant. And I can go down a little bit into what I mean by that. Partly it is very rarely are you thinking about who your audience actually is. As a lawyer, you can have a million different audiences. And if you aren't thinking about who that audience is first before you start writing, there's a very big risk that you're going to write for the wrong audience or with the wrong voice. For example, if you're writing for a judge, very often you have to remember that you're writing actually for that judge's clerk. And so that's why writing with Blue Book styling is important, because oftentimes your clerk doesn't want to get distracted by your failures to Blue Book. But you also have to remember that you need narrative and you need to make your point. And so keep your Blue Book problems out of the way and then move into your narrative. It also goes into the way that you convince people, right? So if you're writing on your website and you're trying to convince people that they should hire you or that you can help them with their problem, don't use lawyer words. Don't write like you're trying to convince the Supreme Court of something. You need to write as though the person who found you on the internet is going to read it and talk to you about something. And they need to understand your worldview and the reasons that you can help them and the way that you help them really quickly, really simply. And if you're not writing for them, you're really not only missing an opportunity, but you're going to turn them off in a heartbeat.
Good rant. So actually, I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about websites because it's relevant to your current role. But before we get to that, tell me about your current role and a bit about your background.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm Marshall Lichty. I am a member of the team at Lawyerist.com. And Lawyerist's sole purpose in life is to help small firm lawyers find their ideal clients and then build a business around them to help support those clients once they come in the door. We do that in a whole bunch of ways, not least of which is writing a website with about 4,000 pages of content on it that help people do that. So great thought leadership from a bunch of people, not just our lawyers team. And then we also combine a bunch of other resources like a podcast and like downloadable forms. We have a paid program that we call Lawyerist Lab that helps folks in a more concierge way. So we have mastermind groups and private online Facebook groups, an online course, and a whole bunch of tools that we use to help people really drill down on what their goals are. So that's what we do at Lawyerist. Backing up, I am a lawyer. I graduated from the University of Minnesota Law School in 2002, and I've practiced in a pretty good sized firm for Minnesota, about 90 lawyers. And then I worked for a very small shop in a tiny little part of St. Paul, Minnesota, and then owned my own practice with a partner for almost 5 years. And I sold that practice last March and moved to Lawyerist. So that's kind of about me. I also am part of a startup team building a marketing technology program.
So what's cool about all of that is that you have a pretty good amount of experience in a law firm, and then you've also been on kind of the business practical side. And I'm not going to age you right now, but I'm guessing based on the year that you graduated that you're around 40. Am I right with that?
You are indeed, a little north of it.
Okay, so I'm 40, so calling it a little north might be designed to make me feel bad or good, I don't know. But you and I right now are going to get a little nerdy, and we are going to have this is confessions of the middle-aged, middle-class white guy, and these conversations always lead to Joseph Campbell. So when I was in high school, and this might resonate with you, and dear viewer, this is relevant to what we're talking about. But in the middle of high school, I caught a series of interviews with Bill Moyers of PBS interviewing a guy named Joseph Campbell. Changed my life, and I'm gathering probably you had a similar experience. So before we get into the legal writing side of this conversation, tell me about Joseph Campbell. What do you know about Joseph Campbell?
Well, let me, I might propose that we talk about Joseph Campbell in a little bit different way. Everything that you need to know about Joseph Campbell, you learned in kindergarten. And the reason you learned it in kindergarten is because at kindergarten or before, depending upon your parents' screen time rules, you watched your first Disney movie. And your first Disney movie is, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was The Lion King. Maybe it was Ratatouille. Maybe it was Moana. Maybe it was, Sleeping Beauty. They are all the same movie. And they are all the same movie based on a piece and a philosophy that Joseph Campbell wrote in his book, A Hero with a Thousand Faces. All of that being based on his conversations and his belief in Jungian philosophy. All of that is to say, if you want to know what Campbell has to say about storytelling, go watch your favorite Disney movie and then watch the next one and then watch the next one and then watch the next one. And pretty soon you will understand why Campbell's view of storytelling is absolutely critical, not just to making blockbusters that make $200 million in their opening weekend, but to building storylines that resonate with people. And Campbell's philosophy or theory was that there is only one story. You either know it and tell it, or you goof it up. And if you goof it up, then it is very hard for people to connect with it. And so part of what writing is, and part of what being a lawyer is, and part of what being persuasive and emotional is writing about Joseph Campbell's theory on storytelling.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of this that I tell all the time, and I'm going to get some of the details wrong, is, there was the two phases of Steve Jobs at Apple, and one was pre-Pixar and one was post-Pixar. And in the pre-Pixar world, part of the reason that he got let go at Apple was this brilliant quality computer that they created. He went and took out a 4-page New York Times ad, super expensive, where he listed all these features and benefits, just these details of this computer. Then he went to Pixar, and post-Pixar, when they created a computer, it was a 1-page ad that basically said, this is a product for creative people. Are you a creative person? Meaning, in the first case, he thought it was all features and benefits. In the second case, he realized that it's all about story, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And for us as writers, I think it's relevant to when we're trying to persuade somebody, we need to realize it's not about features and benefits. It's about the story people, our readers, tell themselves about themselves and how we help lead them through that narrative. So this idea of story is really fundamental, not just to legal writing in some vague sense, but also in just the sense of persuasion and of moving people. You have to start with the story they tell themselves about themselves and how you can impact that.
It's undoubtedly true. And I can't stress enough the fact that the better you are able to understand how your reader is a hero, the better you'll be able to bring them through that hero's journey to get them where they belong, to get them to come out on the other side, triumphant in their journey.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about websites relevant to that. But before we get to kind of lawyerist principles for websites, because you guys give out awards and feature attorney websites, and I definitely want to talk about that context. But let's keep going with this idea of the hero of the story. So there's a book that you're familiar with called Building a Story Brand. I think, is the guy Donald Miller?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think Miller's the name.
I think that's right. Anyway, It's called Building a Story Brand. It's really good. And just to sort of summarize it, it is basically an argument that the hero of the story you tell on your website or in your sales materials or whatever, the hero is not you. The hero is not your company. The hero is the reader. And that hero's journey, that monomyth, that path of that is the central part of every story. That building a story brand says that your website copy, your writing, should reflect that movement. So, Marshall, summarize for me, if you would, kind of the broad steps of the hero's journey / that story brand principle. What is the journey we're trying to get the hero, the reader, through?
Sure. So, let me first just prime you by having you think about your favorite Disney story or your favorite movie, because it will help walk us through it, whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek or The Little Mermaid or Aladdin.
Or The Emperor's New Groove, which is the most underrated Disney movie. It is awesome. It's better than Star Wars. It's not really, but it is a great movie.
Magnificent. And really, I don't know if this resonates with anyone, but WALL-E does this journey, at least in the first 45 minutes or so, without a single word. There's not a word spoken. And so sometimes if you have seen WALL-E, that might be a useful way to envision this journey. So what Campbell and Jung and what building a story brand talk about is the idea that you are introduced to a person, our eventual hero, in their ordinary world, whatever it looks like to be in that world. And they are somehow called to adventure, right? Whether that's Moana, whether it's WALL-E, whose adventure is to dig around and clean up all of the garbage until he finds cool trinkets that he stores. And then he eventually finds this plant. And he thinks that's cool. And that's going to seed the rest of our story, if you'll forgive that obvious dad joke and pun. And maybe the next thing is that there is some reluctance and a lack of clarity about what the adventure is until he meets the wise old guide, very often a woman, very often a shape-shifting woman, who will inspire him or her on a journey of some sort. And that wise old person gives a plan and encouragement, and then again reinforces that call to action. Then our hero goes off and has the first threshold, and it's usually a mixed bag of success and failure. And then there are further tests along the way. And usually we find a helper, or maybe two, who can help carry our hero along the journey and teach valuable lessons along the way. And then they finally reach the innermost cave, and they have their supreme ordeal, which is oftentimes in that innermost cave or not far from it. Until they seize the sword and take the road back, usually facing a couple more little challenges on the way. They are resurrected, and eventually they return with the elixir. And here's the critical part, that leads to their success and failure. And they share the elixir. They share the story. They share what they have learned on their journey with everyone else to inspire them to their own heroic journey. And that kind of is the arc of Campbell's writing. It's the arc of Miller's theory about how to build a successful company. And it is certainly what Pixar and Disney have done to great success with all kinds of great movies.
Well, and to apply it to the legal writing and this persuasive writing that we're doing, which again does include websites, that book, Building a Story Brand, he kind of reduces this to, and if you imagine this, you can sense this in the kind of writing you would be writing for a judge. But the idea is that you start with a character who has certain wants, they go into some trouble, and an old guide shows up and says, here's the solution, give it a shot. You give it a shot, and it works or doesn't based on kind of the inputs that you put into it, and whether it's a tragic story or not. But in that book, in Building a Story Brand, he makes the point that you, dear lawyer, you are the old guide. You're the Obi-Wan. You're the Yoda. You're the Dumbledore. Was it Dumbledore? That's the guy.
Dumbledore's the guy.
Harry
yeah.
Potter, right.
You're going to need to get that one.
So you got to have the old guide, and you are the old guide in this scenario.
That's right.
Your job, your function in the story of the person who lands on your website is you saying, hey, I see you, right? I see the wants and needs that you have. and I've got this solution. And if you'll just try it, I know you're reluctant, but if you'll just try it, you're going to see the results on the other end. So you guys, like I mentioned, you guys do at Lawyerist, you give awards out for some of these things, for website development and website design. Tell me about how these principles of walking somebody through a story applies to websites, to lawyer websites.
Sure. So obviously there are a couple of principles at play. One of them is, how do you usher someone on a path that you think that they need to be on? And so the first one is to understand what that path is that you want them to adventure on. And for a lot of folks, that is hire me eventually, right? And I will guide you along the path to get this problem resolved. And so very early in your adventure with your website, you got to clarify what you want your people to do when they get there. Right. And so don't send a bunch of mixed messages. If what you need for them to do is to book an appointment with you, make it as easy and clear and obvious as anything in the world that the next thing for them to do is to come meet with you. Right. And anything that's noise between that adventure that you want them on and your goals for them is really troublesome. And so what I would say first is start with a clear goal. What do you want them to do? How do you help them? And then you quickly transition from there into thinking about what that call to action will be. And so on a good website, you will see a very clear call to action. It will be in a lot of places, and it will make it very clear what your ideal client is supposed to do next. Right? If you want them to call you to set up an appointment, great. If you want them to click this link to set up an appointment, great. If you want them to join your email list so that you can market to them further as you help them along the path, great. Do that, but don't do all three. Pick the right one and highlight that call to action in everything that you do, because that's where your story is going to lead them, is into taking that part of the action that will eventually lead them to their triumphant overcoming of the challenge. So a big part of that, though, is focusing on your client-centered value proposition. So again, if you are a criminal defense lawyer and you are trying to meet someone where they are and get them to take action so that you can be their wise guide and help them on this adventure that they're on, you need to understand what they're doing right when they find you. And sometimes that's, they were just, pulled over and they're, looking at their phone, or they have been arrested and you're their first phone call, or they've been arrested and they were released and now they have this process that they have to work through. You have to understand that the urgency is a little bit lower, but they've got a hearing coming up, or they've got bond, or they've got whatever it is. Understanding where they are in that journey and talking to them during that process to help them understand what's coming, what challenges they're going to have ahead, and what you can do to help them along the way, and why your path or your plan is one that will ultimately result in a successful outcome. So that's kind of the next part of things that we talk to people about, is make sure that when you design your website and you have your call to action, you have your one clear choice for them to make, that you do it in a way that is responsive to where they're sitting. After that, we have a whole bunch of little add-ons, but I think those are the big and clear ones. Tell them, meet them where they are, right with the idea in mind that you understand their pain and their fears and where they are in the process, and then help them understand what they need to do next for you to help them get to the next thing. And then we have a bunch of other stuff that, mobile design and responsive design is absolutely critical. Let's see what else. We have one that I love is accessibility. So is your website built to be accessible? And by that, I mean, if someone can't read, can they work through your website? And how do you know? What tools do you have in place for someone who is blind and can't read? Can they still find what they need from your website? Can they learn what you do and hire you? What if they can't type? What if they don't have a computer? What if they are any number of a variety of other accessibility issues that might result in people not knowing how to find you or how to best use your services? If you design your website with that in mind, it will make for a better experience for everybody, not just someone who has accessibility challenges.
Yeah, and I think you started with the fundamental thing of understanding the character. When I I had a law partner, Angela, who, after we parted ways because I moved to a different part of Texas, she asked me to come back and write some content for her website. And the website initially was just very plain Jane. Here's a button, and there wasn't a lot of narrative. There weren't a lot of words. And I went in, and we kind of went back and forth on this, but I went in and said, you've got to express that you understand the struggle of that person. And that means that you're narrowing down to a particular struggle. The way that StoryBrand puts it is that every character has external problems, internal problems, and philosophical problems. So we all know this with our legal cases, that when a client comes in and they tell us my problem is X, that's rarely the actual issue, right? They probably had some very emotional, very internal issue, and then went online and found some website that says what you are supposed to say when you go talk to a lawyer is X, Y, and Z. But in reality, when we're writing our content, whether it's for a website, or I had written kind of a manifesto called You versus the System for would-be clients in Rockport, Texas, I was getting down to you feel weakened. You feel weakened from your situation. The system that you're facing weakens you. You want justice. You want whatever the emotional fulfillment is that you're trying to give your character. Communicate that, because that person is going through a journey that is not technical, right? The technical side is what they need in order, the bag of tools to get back to a Joseph Campbell reference, that bag of tools that the old guide gives you. They need that bag of tools, but really what they need is to get to the other side of that internal, external, and philosophical fight that's inside them that they're trying to get through.
It's right on the button. Right on the button. I completely agree. And one thing that you said that resonated with me is oftentimes you think that all has to be in your words, right? That you need to write all of that and that more words are necessary to convey that. But this is another good time to think about WALL-E, or to think about some of the other Disney movies that we watched. A lot of times, this doesn't need to be conveyed in words. You understand your hero's journey, your client's journey. And oftentimes, what they need is clarity and quickly, right? They need to understand that you understand them. And that doesn't always take words. I don't mean to suggest that you just wrote your way into their journey, but just that sometimes might be your inclination, is just to throw a bunch of words on pages. And going back to like Lawyerist and our view of what a great website is and what the hero's journey looks like when they see your website, very often it's avoiding clutter and making your messaging crystal clear in as few words as you can. And so a lot of times writing in particular, and this goes back to my point about stop writing like a lawyer, Strunk and White is a great guide for writing, because they talk about just clarity, boil it all down to the essence. Don't use utilize when use is what you mean, right? Why would you say that if what you want is to say, use this tool, not utilize this tool? And do everything that you can to ratchet down the verbosity of your language to help that person very quickly and very easily and in very understandable language understand that you know their journey. You've been on this journey with other people before, and if they come along on your boat, you will bring them to the end where you will not be able to carry them across the finish line. They will have to do it on their own. It's their journey, but you will help them and guide them along the way. So avoiding clutter and being clear about that is one of the enduring challenges of writing and conveying messages on websites and in briefs and in other places.
I love the word verbosity, by the way, because in telling people to stop being so verbose, like the word is verbose, it just makes me happy. All right. We've got just a few minutes, Marshall. I appreciate these ideas on leading somebody through their own hero's journey and seeing that reader as the hero. Let me ask you a couple of quick shot questions, because I know you have opinions about these. Where do citations go?
The bottom.
In your legal writing?
The bottom.
Why the bottom?
I'll preface this by saying that there are minds that may differ on this, maybe even reasonable minds that may differ, to borrow a term from law school. here's the challenge with telling a great story. If you want to persuade someone of something, my philosophy and Campbell's philosophy is that you do that through narrative. And if you are going to bring a judge through a narrative that allows you as the author to shape his or her understanding of the facts, to use law to bolster your understanding of the facts, and reveal in no uncertain terms that the only outcome to come from this is for them to rule in your client's favor, you do that through a narrative arc. And when you explode a narrative arc through distraction, it gets very hard to be persuasive. In my view, citations, inline citations, particularly inline citations that are string cites or whatever, are absolutely destructive to that goal. So I understand that there might be court rules that suggest you have to do inline cites and that they'll ignore your footnotes. Or I understand that there's a lively debate in our profession about this. I don't think there should be. I think that's dumb because it goes to the fact that these citations are somehow the important part of your writing, and they're not. They are the backup. They're the data. They're the support. They're the evidence that you need to convince if someone looks under the hood to find that you are right, that this is true. And I want lawyers to be able to do that, or your reader to be able to do that. But I want them to be able to do it only when they're done with the narrative and you're done telling them your story and walking them through the journey. So in my view, if you are thinking about your reader, and you're thinking about the goal of persuading through narrative arc, there is no other way to do it. It is destructive to your purpose to put inline cites in your brief.
All right, final question for you, Marshall. You mentioned that you guys like to focus on how to make it so somebody can have a profitable business that delivers legal services. One of the some of the pushback that I've gotten to this idea that Dear Solo and Small U should be improving your writing craft is, well, if I'm sitting there learning how to write better, I'm not billing that time. So how do you think solos can balance that? How do they find time to improve their craft and justify spending that time when it's not billable?
So the long answer is one we obviously don't have time to get into. The short answer is when you find clarity around your ideal client and the process or system or the journey, the proven success method that you use to help your ideal client with the kinds of problems that they run into, you are able to create a business that then supports that work. And that usually means finding efficiencies. It means finding a process that you can use to really efficiently and clearly and powerfully and helpfully solve that problem. And so when you have clarity about the journey that you want your clients to go on, you can build systems and processes that make that an efficient process. And when you've built those efficiencies, you are building margin for yourself. I was just talking to somebody, I don't know if you've ever heard about this concept of a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And everybody's got a different one, and sometimes they're kind of weird and esoteric. For me, I think what I would love is to find a way for lawyers, small firm lawyers in particular, to carve out 1 million worry-free nights and weekends from their lives, right? Right now, what challenges small firm lawyers is that they have to worry about their business all the time. It's because everything is an emergency. Everything has a deadline that has to be done. We're probably procrastinating on that. And the challenge that we find is that people are always doing their work. And this was my experience too. They're working on their clients and their clients' work, and they never have time to work on their business or to find those efficiencies or to build that story or to work on their craft or to improve their abilities as business owners. And so one of the first things that we do in Lawyerist Lab is help people decide what their strategies are and what their goals are, and then figure out ways to carve time out to work on your business and on learning and on improving. Because when you run and own a small business, you are not just a lawyer. You are the head of marketing, you're the head of sales, you're the chief of finance, you're the chief technologist, you are the chief you're the chief HR representative. You are all of the things to all of the people. And if you think that you can spend 100% of your time working on client files, you are neglecting dramatic parts of your business. And so step one is to find margin to work on those things. For me, it was to dedicate a day of my life every week to working on the business, period, full stop. Fridays, I didn't meet with clients. I didn't take phone calls. I didn't do anything but for 8 hours a week work on that thing.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Marshall, for chatting with us about this and for helping lawyers figure out how to focus on the client. It seems not very intuitive, but by making the client the hero of the story, of your firm's story, it's you benefit, right? You're not going to be Obi-Wan melting in front of Vader in the hall of the Death Star, right? You're going to do well. So, Marshall, if people want to get in contact with you to learn more about this and about how lawyers can help them build a business around these kind of success principles, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Find me on Twitter. I'm at MSLichty, MSLichty. You can find us at lawyerist.com. If you want to get an idea of where your firm sits, get an idea of how you're doing on all of these things, take the small firm scorecard, lawyerist.com/scorecard. And it's a self-guided self-assessment tool on about 40 or 50 questions that ask you how you're doing and ask you to self-assess. And if you're trying to get an idea of like where can you quickly improve to find that margin and find the spots where you can really dedicate yourself to working on your business, go check it out at the scorecard on lawyerist.com. Listen to our podcast, tweet at me. We love helping folks who are struggling and trying to find those margins. Because my BHAG, this is an official lawyerist policy, but my BHAG is to find 1 million nights and weekends where you can enjoy your time and your life and your family in a worry-free way while still running a successful small law firm.
Awesome. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of Insights from Case Text. Be sure to come back for the next episode where we will continue to talk about writing for lawyers. Have a good one.